Before we get into the session, promo moment, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Hendrickson Fleet Solutions, Isuzu Commercial Truck of America, Orange EV, Sprague Operating Resources LLC, and the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. We really are grateful to all of our sponsors who helped make this such a wonderful event for the 6th year in a row. So, really excited to introduce you to our panelists.
Thank you for having me this morning. Good morning. I'm Stephen Levy with Sprague, a managing director. And I think the key takeaway in the next couple of minutes is to realize that Sprague's been around for 150 years. And the reason why Sprague's been around that long is because we watch the watchwords from the industry, from a societal standpoint to meeting industry's needs, to making sure that, especially in the fleet area, that whatever we're delivering is meeting that truck duty cycle, both starting from well oil back in the days to kerosene to coal to traditional diesel fuel and gasoline, to moving to programs and services to help our customers, whether they be in the fleet business, the on-road, the off-road, power generation, or heat, to have solutions for them. And over the years, as Susan mentioned this morning, we've been trying to reduce emissions. And we've taken some steps. It goes back to the early 70s, from taking lead out of gasoline to reducing sulfur, in the 90s, and then bringing along biodiesel and ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel, and now renewable diesel. So it's all about having the products and services that our customers want and what society wants. And today the magic words are sustainability, decarbonization, affordability. So those are the products we try and take to market, whether it is for non-fossil fuels or natural gas or electricity or even solar.
So the goal here today is to provide information about renewable diesel, biodiesel, hydrogen, mobile charging for electric vehicles. We've got a lot of topics to cover, not a lot of time to do it, so we're going to dive right into our questions. I'm going to start with you, Steve Levy. Let's talk a little bit about renewable diesel and biodiesel. As a motor fuel, what are the distinctions, and what should someone who's looking into these fuels know?
Thank you, great question. As a matter of fact, about 23 minutes ago I got a call about that same question for a recreational boater who was looking to use diesel. But one of the big challenges we have today, especially that people have been around a while, is the distinction between biodiesel and renewable diesel. Many think it's the same, and it is the same when you talk about their feedstocks, whether it's used cooking oil or recycled grease, trap grease, or animal fat. But that's where the distinction ends, along with both being a non-fossil fuel. So biodiesel is made through a trans-esterification process where you need a catalyst like methanol to make biodiesel. And it meets an ASTM spec 6751, which is not the motor fuel spec. And versus renewable diesel, same feedstocks, but it goes through a hydro-treated process where it basically comes out of the process as an ASTM, in your case the 975, where it's a drop-in fuel, no infrastructure or modifications to the engine. Whereas if you use the pure biodiesel, especially in this area, you would have to make modifications, not just with the engine, but with storage and infrastructure as well. Renewable diesel has become a lot more popular now because it's a drop-in fuel. Very popular in the West Coast because of the clean fuel standard, otherwise they call it their low carbon fuel standard, which helps incentivize decarbonizing. So when it first started there, probably around 12, 13 years ago, it's now a little over 70% of their market, and now also being used in other low carbon fuel standard states, as mentioned this morning, in Oregon, Washington, New Mexico, and Hawaii. One of the other big differences is that with RD, it's a drop-in fuel. You can mix it with regular diesel today, 50-50, 80-20. You can use RD today or ultra low sulfur diesel tomorrow. So again, it's all compatible, which makes it easy for infrastructure. So as a supplier, we're able to bring it in, bring it in the harbor, we can put it in our storage tanks, use our normal trucks to make deliveries with it. And again, it can go into any type of storage. It's more of an interest now because, it goes by either R99, R99.9, or R100. It's all the same product. And although it's mostly being used in California now, we originally did some testing here in 2016, 2018, then 2020. Sprague went committed to it in 2023, not only in its own fleet, but we followed Port Authority, who was the first ones to commit to RD. And today, there's many fleets using it, both public and private. It's available limited on the retail side. It's available with us and in New York and the Bronx, at the largest terminal in the city, and up in Albany. And it'll become more widely available if people would start to use it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Steve, with the renewable diesel. I know you mentioned the low carbon fuel standard, and Steve Dodge, I know you've been tracking those fuel markets and some of the adoption of the low carbon fuel standards. You mentioned Steve Levy in California, Oregon, Washington. So the question for Steve Dodge here is, what trends are you seeing, and what are some of the takeaways that can be applied to the New York fuel market as we're starting to see the adoption at Port Authority and in some of those areas? And I have a slide for you, Steve, if you're...
Yeah, I'll get to that in just a second. One thing I meant to mention in the beginning, the first slide, is it mentioned that we will exceed 6 billion gallons by 2030. That's outdated. We're going to exceed 6 billion gallons by the end of this year. And I'll talk more about why federal policy has been instrumental as well as state policy. But our vision was 6 billion by 2030. We'll hit 6 billion by this year, and 15 by 2050. And I think we're going to exceed that well before 2050. And why? Because, as Steve mentioned, it works. It is a drop-in fuel that can be used, both biodiesel and renewable diesel. Biodiesel has a little more restrictions because it has to be blended, particularly for transportation use. But, like New York City is doing, it can be blended with renewable diesel, or it can be blended, like other jurisdictions doing, with fossil diesel to lower the carbon. The average carbon reduction for our fuels, and it varies depending on the feedstock and whether it's RD or BD, biodiesel, renewable diesel, is more than 70%. And it can be well over 80% in other applications, as well as it just burns cleaner. There's less maintenance because it burns cleaner. And I'm going to push back a little later in this panel with what Sasan said last panel about biodiesel, but I'll get to that in a minute. I'll try to do it gently and respectfully, but I kind of disagree with what he was saying. But I think one of the things that people say, that one of the things he was ignoring, and some states have ignored, is that there are dramatic decreases, maybe not so much with NOx in the newer engines, but with particulate matter, which is a huge deal, particularly in environmental justice communities. Dramatic reductions in particulate matter, as well as other co-pollutants, as well as carbon, with the use of biodiesel and renewable diesel. But yeah, so we talked a lot in the previous panel about, one of the panels this morning, about low carbon fuel standards, and they have worked dramatically. California, it's been in effect for a number of years, and it is now harder to buy fossil diesel in California, whether you're a trucker or whatever you're using it for. That's the on and off-road diesel pool. It is harder to buy fossil diesel than it is non-fossil diesel. In California, because of the low carbon fuel standard, over 70% of the diesel pool is non-fossil. In Oregon, which has had a similar program in for a number of years, it's about 30% and rising. In Washington, which just started their program, I think last year, it's already up to 20%. So a fifth of the diesel pool now in the state of Washington is non-fossil diesel. New Mexico started their program this year. Hawaii, just the governor last week signed a low carbon fuel standard legislation, so we expect to see that in place in the next couple of years. if I do my job correctly, Massachusetts will be state number 6. Hopefully by the end of this week, we'll know if it gets in the Senate bill. And that's why we're hoping New York is number 6 and number 7 or there soon. Because what a low carbon fuel standard does is squeeze the carbon out of transportation fuels. And it's become tremendously effective in the states where it's been used. I should also mention, even though this is a transportation forum, biodiesel is used primarily in the Northeast for heating fuel. And if you live in New York, you know you have a bioheat mandate of B10 that's going to go up to B20 in a couple of years. Connecticut, it's B10, and Rhode Island, it's B20. And so, you know, sometimes we, particularly in this era, we kind of say, oh, geez, another federal program, right? It really takes a combination. I don't care what technology you're talking about, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's renewable natural gas, whether it's electricity. It's really important to have a government incentive. You need the government's thumb on the scale to help these programs thrive, just the way it is. And we've seen that. We can talk more about it later on the federal level. We've seen it in states like California and other states, and it's working. It is reducing the carbon content of transportation fuels without costing end users a tremendous amount. And cost, as Steve said, is really key. California fuels are really expensive, but it's not because of the low carbon fuel standard.
And Ben, I'd like to talk a little bit about electrification and electric trucks. And you know, one of the big concerns is the infrastructure, right? The time that it's taking to get charging installed and the lead times. So what can a fleet be considering as an alternative option while they're waiting for their permanent infrastructure to be installed? You may.
Yeah, so I'll give the example that I hesitate to do in this room, which is to cite California, but that's what we tend to do. And I have good data on this. So I think what's driving a lot of the interest right now in electrification for Class 8 is the Tesla Semi. In California, through the HVIP incentive program, Jenny or Adam or others can give the details on how many maybe Tesla Semi vouchers are pending in New York. But in California, we've seen that there are 1,300 Tesla Semis that have been approved for vouchers. So approved for funding, awaiting deployment throughout the state. Some of those are going to be good to go. They'll have their infrastructure sorted. Others will be able to access maybe shared charging hubs, think of like Forum Mobility or Terawatt, shared charging developers like those. For the most part, I suspect that utility lead times are going to be prohibitive, and they're going to become essentially the long pole in the tent, right? So even if you've gone by the books, you've conferred with your utility, you've brought them in early and often as you've been instructed to do, they're just demands of physics and supply chains. So that means that utility energization may not happen for 2 or 3 years, in some cases for large enough service requests in California, and you have voucher redemption timelines to look at. You have, well, I want to get this asset that I'm purchasing on the road, doing revenue operation for my fleet sooner than the utility will allow. So that's where a solution like ours can come in, where we can help you align your infrastructure readiness with when the vehicles are actually coming to market. And until recently, this has been largely a conversation about sort of medium duty and light duty, but now with the Tesla Semi and a couple of other Class 8 offerings, it's more and more a reality where the Class 8 demand for energy and the power density those trucks need is really actually pushing the envelope. So if you're looking at a Tesla Megacharger, you're buying the Tesla equipment that you need to purchase in order to charge your Tesla Semi truck, that could be 1.2 megawatts at a Tesla V4 cabinet. So it's an incredible amount of power demand, and especially if you're going straight from diesel to this Tesla format, your fleet managers, your facilities managers are not necessarily going to be expecting and fully versed in all of the requirements that they need to be doing in collaboration with the utility, learning about demand charges and all of these factors. So having a drop-in solution that can actually provide on-site generation, battery storage, as well as the charging. We can do, you know, if a customer has the charging equipment already and Tesla can can fulfill that, we can just provide power basically into their sub panel or into their switchgear. Or we can bring the whole soup to nuts proposition, drop it on your site if there's enough space, obviously, and have that up and running in a matter of weeks rather than waiting years for utility service. And the detail I like to explain as well is we're not crowding out that as the permanent long-term solution, right? So if you have your long-term objective as I want a grid-tied service, it's going to be ultra reliable, I know what the costs are going to be, I'm comfortable with what I'm looking at in terms of ways to manage demand charges, we can go away as soon as the grid power is ready and your service is prepared and built out. But until then, it's really useful, I think, and empowering for fleets to know that there are other solutions, which could be ours in other duty cycles. It could be a battery-only solution. I know there's a hydrogen fuel cell kind of version of what we provide that is a great profile for other use cases as well. So just knowing that there are interim solutions that can keep fleets up and running, get their EVs on the road sooner, I think is a really important detail to have in play when, as any of us, I think, can attest, when you need to be sort of consulting or advising to a fleet customer about what options are out there and what they're best served doing based on what their objectives are.
Yeah. Go ahead and grab that. No, I really want to just thank Ben for that point, because I think it's so important to think about the whole transition, right? You know, we really want our end goal to be reducing carbon, right? We want to see no more emissions or very little emissions from the transportation sector so that we're all breathing cleaner air and the next generations are breathing cleaner air. And I think this panel demonstrates that it takes a village and that it takes a team and that we're all working toward that same goal, and that there are a lot of ways to do that. But Steve?
Yeah, so I was just going to add something along the same lines. We are not competitors up here at all. We need it all, and Doreen said that this morning. The state of New York needs it all, the nation needs it all, depending on the applications, particularly in the short term. You know, 10 years from now, this conference may be talking solely about EVs and the next generation of batteries, the next generation infrastructure and so forth. But when I was talking to the Alec, I think his name was, Kenworth fellow, when I took my test drive, and I know we have a lot of truckers in here who probably have bought rigs recently. Those tractors are about $200,000. That's a huge investment. They're going to be on the road for 10 years, maybe 12 years, 1 million plus miles. You know, those engines are good for 1 million miles and they can be rebuilt and put back in. So those trucks, those diesel trucks, are going to be around for a long time. And during that period, when those trucks are on the road, we're working towards these other technologies, which is so important. But what do we want burning in those trucks? It makes sense to have a lower carbon emission fuel, whether it's a biodiesel, renewable diesel blend, straight renewable diesel, which is a drop-in fuel, while those trucks are on the road.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, right? You know, just is getting through that transition and working together towards a cleaner future is really important. And we talk a little bit about here, you know, things that have been demonstrated in California, and I know that can feel a bit taboo at times, right? New York is like, we want to do things our way, and it's different, it's a different environment, but data is really important, right? And to see someone deploying some of these projects and being able to learn from that, I think is really valuable. So while it may be like, oh no, California, I think, you know, we're all on the same team and we're all working together. You know, and just thinking a little bit about where we are right now with the federal funding and the state of the federal funding, you know, how would you describe what New York can be doing to enhance the markets for biodiesel, renewable diesel, electric vehicles? And I'll just pose that to the panel, and you know, whoever wants to take that one, feel free to run with it.
Well, in New York, that's California. We're on the East Coast, so it's the CLF, Clean Fuel Standard, CLF. But that's what it is. We need the incentives to decarbonize. You know, and I think that what you'll find. Anybody here have a boat? Nobody? Well, okay. So just to show you, there's the National Marine Manufacturers Association, Engine Manufacturers Association, just came out with a 500-page book that not only gives the data about the recreational boats, but there too, where their engines are lasting, or they're keeping their boats 15 to 30 years, they're saying, okay, we can't go to electric now, and if we did, a lot of those boat owners are not going to switch. So how can they be more sustainable? and them too are looking for and endorsing, whether you're Mack Boring or Volvo Pena endorsing renewable diesel, or Suzuki who is endorsing sustainable non-ethanol gasoline. But the key is having that clean fuel standard, low carbon fuel standard to incentivize it. And what's cool now is that we're seeing more processing plants come online to make these non-fossil fuels. And as California is becoming saturated, and other ones that need a place for those products to go. So it'd be great if we can have the demand and bring them here. But we need that clean fuel standard.
And programs like New York City is also a great program as well with their clean truck program. And from a dealer standpoint, I think there's also opportunities to streamline that process to where the burden is not necessarily on us as an intermediary to carry paper and pay interest on this stuff, to basically streamline that process and do things smarter and do things more efficiently.
I feel like in New York for years we've felt like a lot of the puzzle pieces are largely there. They just need a little help getting the last couple of inches to all fit together. I think programs like a CFS or Cap and Invest can go a long way to helping that for certain, but there's also something to be said for flexible funding, innovation funding that can really showcase and allow for, or even just connecting fleet users with resources like interim charging solutions, for example, that connect fleets with the ability to have workable answers for the problems they're facing in reality. Right? If we have vehicle funding, but the utility service to actually charge those assets and make sure they're usable, that's what I'm referring to by pointing to the misalignment or the dislocation between some of those puzzle pieces. So making sure that everything can be married up and that we can have more success stories. Part of me laments that we're still at the stage where we are talking about needing to highlight success stories, but we are. When we talk about fleets like Manhattan Beer, City of New York, there are always examples we keep coming back to. We need to get more of those examples out there to demonstrate that this is scalable, it's viable, and it's ultimately sustainable.
Great, thank you so much. I think what we've learned here is that there are a lot of options out there. There are viable options right now. And one thing that I always like to close with for fleet owners is consider your options. You don't have to go from 0 to 160 seconds. You want to dip your toe in the water, get a little renewable diesel, get one electric vehicle, right? Learn from that, understand the differences, and that really, I think, more than anything else, getting that deployment started is a great learning tool. So thank you so much to the panelists. Round of applause for them, please.